called Thorstein, who lived in a great house in a prosperous seacoast city of Iceland that boasted a fine harbor. Thorstein was a rich man, a noble leader, wise, gentle, and just in all things. Thorstein was a very outstanding man, well liked by everyone, a handsome man with fine eyes, father of many children. The story goes that one day a ship put into the harbor, and its captain was invited to stay at the home of Thorstein. The two men quickly became friends. One morning after a night of restless sleep, Thorstein told the captain that he had had a strange dream. But there's no meaning in dreams, he added, preferring to say no more about it. However, the captain prodded, frequently asking Thorstein about the dream, until he finally gave in. "If I tell you the dream," said Thorstein, "you must explain its meaning." The captain promised to try. Thorstein related, "I dreamt that I was here at home and that I saw a beautiful swan up on the rooftop. She seemed to belong here, and I prized her highly. Then I saw a big eagle flying down from the mountains toward our house. He settled beside the swan, chatted gently to her, and she seemed happy. Next I saw another eagle flying from the south. He too landed on the rooftop beside the swan and tried to win her favor. Now it seemed to me that the first eagle became very angry when the other arrived. They had a long, fierce fight, and both of them fell to the ground dead. The swan seemed very sad and dejected. Then I woke up," said Thorstein. "It's a trifling dream, but let me hear your interpretation of it." "These birds must be the spirits of people," began the captain. "Your wife will soon give birth to a fine and beautiful baby girl whom you will love dearly. Well-born men will come from the same directions as the eagles in your dream to ask for your daughter in marriage. Their love for her will be beyond all reason. They will fight over her, and both of them will die because of this. That's my explanation of your dream." It was not long after that Thorstein's wife did give birth to a beautiful baby girl, whom they named Helga the Fair. in another city not too distant, lived Illugi, who, after Thorstein, was the most important man in that part of the country. Illugi was the father of many children, but only one comes into this story, GUNNLAUG, a tall, strong, and promising lad. For all his good qualities, he was thoroughly boisterous, ambitious, unyielding, and ruthless. He was an able but a coarse poet, and earned the name of Serpent Tongue. When GUNNLAUG was 12, he left home and rode to Thorstein's farm, where he lived for some time and studied the law from Thorstein. GUNNLAUG became acquainted with Helga, and they took a strong liking to each other. GUNNLAUG enacted a mock engagement to her on the pretext of studying a point of law. GUNNLAUG continued to live at the farms of Thorstein and his own father for 6 years. When GUNNLAUG asked for leave to go on a voyage abroad, his father said, "You shall have your way. You're a lot steadier than before." One day, while Thorstein and GUNNLAUG were riding together, Thorstein offered him a fine stallion. GUNNLAUG replied, "I don't want this horse. I don't need it since I am going abroad. But why don't you offer me something I am willing to accept?" "What is that?" asked Thorstein. "Your daughter, Helga the Fair," replied GUNNLAUG. "That won't be settled so quickly," answered Thorstein, changing the subject. But GUNNLAUG was determined and enlisted the help of his father to help in his proposal. Illugi said to Thorstein, "My son GUNNLAUG says he has made a proposal to you on his own behalf, asking for the hand of your daughter Helga. You know what family he comes from and our wealth. Because of your pleading and for the sake of our friendship," said Thorstein, "Helga shall be promised to GUNNLAUG. But she shall wait 3 years while GUNNLAUG goes abroad and models himself on the conduct of noble men. I am to be held free from any obligation if after he returns I don't approve of his character." Then GUNNLAUG went to sea. GUNNLAUG visited 3 kings on his travels. The first was King Ethelred of England, who was spending the winter in London. King Ethelred listened while GUNNLAUG recited a poem he had written for him. It pleased the king. He thanked GUNNLAUG and gave him an embroidered fur-lined cloak of precious cloth. When spring came, GUNNLAUG asked the king for permission to travel further. King Ethelred granted him leave, but made him promise to return the next autumn. Gunnlaug then sailed to Dublin, where he received a fitting welcome by King Sigtryg Silkenbeard. When he had recited a fine poem in honor of the king, the ruler rewarded him by giving him new clothes made of precious cloth, a gold bracelet weighing half a pound, and many other gifts. Gunnlaug thanked him graciously and remained at the court for a time. He went from there to the Orkneys, spent the winter in West Gothland, and in the spring traveled to Uppsala to the court of the King of Sweden, Olaf the Swede. When he arrived, Gunnlaug was readily welcomed. Upon learning that his guest was from Iceland, the king called over Hrafn, another Icelander who was then at his court. Gunnlaug and Hrafn sat down and started to talk together. At first, the two men got along well, but when it came time to read their poetry for the king, each tried to discredit the efforts of the other. One day when Hrafn was ready to leave Sweden, he said to Gunnlaug, "Our friendship must come to an end, because you tried to discredit me here in the presence of noblemen. At some time I shall bring more dishonor on you than you tried to bring on me here." "Your threats don't worry me," replied Gunnlaug, "and nowhere will it be found that I am less honored than you." Hrafn went home to Iceland and enlisted the help of his cousin Skapti, the law speaker, in seeking the hand of Helga the Fair in marriage. They went to Thorstein. "My kinsman Hrafn wants to ask for your daughter's hand in marriage," said Skapti. "She's already promised to Gunnlaug," answered Thorstein, "and I want to keep my agreement." "Haven't those 3 winters which you agreed upon now passed?" asked Skapti. "Yes, but the summer isn't over," said Thorstein. Gunnlaug did not return that summer, and at the great assembly the following summer, Skapti and Hrafn vigorously pursued their suit. Thorstein and Skapti then agreed that if Gunnlaug did not come that summer, the wedding should take place at the winter nights in October, but that if Gunnlaug did arrive to claim his bride, Thorstein should be released from all his agreement with Hrafn. Still, the return of Gunnlaug was delayed. Helga loathed the thought of this other marriage. Gunnlaug, for his part, traveled from Sweden to England during the summer and spent the winter with King Ethelred, greatly esteemed. The following summer he sailed for Iceland and arrived home on the very day of the wedding feast of Helga and Hrafn. Now the story tells of Hrafn. As they sat at the wedding feast, most people noticed that the bride was somewhat dejected. Later, Hrafn had a dream which he described in verse. "In your arms I thought I was struck by a twig of the spear dew, and that your bed, my bride, was reddened in my blood." "I will never weep over such a thing," replied Helga. "You have all cruelly deceived me. Gunnlaug must have come back." She wept bitterly. A little while later, the news of Gunnlaug's return was heard. Helga became harsh towards Hrafn and would not remain with him at his farm. They returned then to her father's farm. There was another wedding that winter. Gunnlaug and Hrafn and Helga were all invited to this wedding feast. Helga often turned her eyes on Gunnlaug, and the saying was borne out, a woman's eyes will tell if she loves a man. On the day they were preparing to go home, Gunnlaug went to Helga, and they talked for a long time. He gave Helga the cloak that King Ethelred had given him, which was a most precious object. She thanked him warmly for the gift. After that, everything was peaceful and without incident for the winter. Hrafn never again enjoyed intimacy with Helga after she and Gunnlaug had met. In the summer, at the great assembly one day, Gunnlaug called for silence and said, "Is Hrafn Onundason here?" He replied that he was. "You know," said Gunnlaug, "that you have married my promised bride and made yourself my enemy. Now I will challenge you to a duel." Hrafn replied, "I'm quite ready for it as soon as you like." The following day, however, a law was made in the legislative court to do away with dueling forever. This was done on the advice of all the wisest men in the country. Some time later, Hrafn came to Gunnlaug and said, "In the summer at the great assembly, you challenged me to a duel. Now I want to propose to you that we both leave Iceland and go abroad next summer to fight a duel in Norway." "Spoken like a splendid fellow," answered Gunnlaug. "I'll gladly accept this proposal." Their kinsmen were greatly upset, but because of this passion they could do nothing to stop it, and furthermore, what fate had decreed could not be prevented. Separately, the two men left Iceland with their companions. They sailed to Norway and then set out for Levanger. Hrafn's party left Levanger just before Gunnlaug arrived. Gunnlaug followed him until they reached a headland overlooking a lake on the highest farm in the valley of Verdal. When they came face to face, Gunnlaug said, "It is good that we have now met." Hrafn replied, "You can choose whether we all fight or just the two of us." Their kinsmen declared they would not hear of a single-handed fight. Gunnlaug said to the guides who had brought them to the place, "You must sit by and help neither side, and be there to tell the story of our encounter." Then they all fought bravely. Gunnlaug and Hrafn fought on fiercely and incessantly, each giving the other great blows and fearless combat. At last, Gunnlaug struck a great blow at Hrafn with the sword and cut off his opponent's leg. Hroffen did not altogether fall, but drew back to a tree stump and propped the stump of his limb on it. "Now you're unfit for battle," said Gunnlaug, "and I'll no longer fight with you, a maimed man." "It's true that things have gone heavily against me," answered Hroffen, "yet I'd still do well enough if I could get something to drink." Then Gunnlaug went to a stream, fetched some water in his helmet, and brought it to him. But as Hroffen reached out for it with his left hand, he struck at Gunnlaug's head with the sword in his right hand, making a terrible wound. At that they fought again hotly, but it ended at last with Gunnlaug overcoming Hroffen, and Hroffen lost his life. The guides then came forward and found Gunnlaug's head wound. Then they attended to the dead men, and after that they lifted Gunnlaug onto his horse and managed to get him right down into Levanger. There he lay for 3 nights, and afterwards died. The death of both Gunnlaug and Hroffen in these circumstances seemed a terrible loss to everyone. Helga the Fair was sad ever after, for her heart never ceased to be Gunnlaug's, even though he was dead. It was Helga's special pleasure to spread out the cloak which Gunnlaug had given her and gaze on it for a great while. There came a time when a terrible sickness fell on Helga's household, and for a long time many suffered from it. Then Helga fell ill as well, but did not take to her bed. One evening she sent for the cloak that Gunnlaug had given her, and when it was brought to her, she spread the cloak in front of her and gazed upon it for a long while. Presently, Helga sank to the floor. And died. There the saga ends.